The rain drummed a relentless, rhythmic beat against the window of the dimly lit apartment, but inside, the only sound I could hear was the frantic thrumming of my own heart. Elena was sitting just inches away on the velvet sofa, the scent of vanilla and rain clinging to her skin. We were supposed to be watching a movie, but the screen was just a blur of flickering ghosts. My focus was entirely on the way her breathing had shifted, slower, heavier, more deliberate. Suddenly, she shifted. Her hand reached out, not to grab the remote or her glass of wine, but to rest firmly on my forearm. The contact was electric, a sudden heat that seared through my sleeve and sent a jolt straight to my chest. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers trailed upward, a slow, bold caress that stopped just at the crook of my elbow. I turned my head, and the air between us seemed to vanish. Her eyes were dark, swirling with an intensity that made my head spin. She leaned in, her movement liquid and confident, until I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The playful teasing that usually defined our friendship was gone, replaced by a charged, suffocating silence. She tilted her head, her lips just a breath away from mine, and for a second, the world outside stopped existing. I could see the pulse jumping in her neck, mirroring the chaos in my own veins. "You're overthinking again," she whispered, her voice a low, honeyed vibration that made my skin prickle. She didn't wait for an answer. She leaned closer, her hair brushing against my cheek, her hand now cupping the back of my neck with a possessive strength I hadn't expected. The closeness was intoxicating, a sensory overload of soft skin and sharp desire. I was drowning in the proximity, convinced that this was the moment everything changed, that finally the mask was slipping. But then, just as I prepared to close the distance, she pulled back a fraction, a cryptic smile playing on her lips. She stood up, leaving me cold and breathless in the wake of her heat. "Don't disappear into your head just yet," she murmured, walking toward the bedroom without looking back. "The night is just getting started." I stayed there, paralyzed by the tension, unaware that within hours she would be drifting in a deep, peaceful slumber, while I was left gasping for air in the wreckage of a truth I wasn't ready to face. The transition from that electric touch to the silence of the bedroom was jarring. As I watched Elena's door click shut, I was haunted by the 3 years that had led us to this threshold. Ours wasn't a story of a sudden spark, but a slow, agonizing burn. We were the perfect couple in our circle, the ones who finished each other's sentences and shared a glance across a crowded room that said more than 1,000 words. But tonight, that connection felt like a frayed wire, sparking dangerously in the dark. I remembered the early days, the way she used to tuck her head into the crook of my neck when she was tired, a gesture of absolute surrender. Back then, the silence between us was a sanctuary. Now, it was a battlefield. The cracks had started small, a phone turned face down on the nightstand, a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, and the way she had started using "I" instead of "we" when talking about the future. I had ignored the signs, choosing instead to drown in the intoxicating pull of her presence. I followed her into the room a few minutes later. The bedside lamp cast long amber shadows across the walls. Elena was already under the covers, her back to my side of the bed. As I climbed in, the bed creaked, a sound that felt like a scream in the quiet room. I lay there, inches away from her, the scent of her perfume still hanging heavy in the air. The physical attraction was still a physical weight, a magnetic pull that made every nerve ending in my body scream to reach out and pull her close. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the silk of her nightgown. I wanted to ask her about the phone call I'd overheard last week,
the one where she spoke in hushed, urgent tones to someone whose name never crossed her lips in my presence. I wanted to ask why her eyes seemed to search for an exit every time I mentioned our upcoming anniversary. Instead, I let my hand settle on our waist. She didn't flinch. In fact, she moved closer, backing into my chest, a movement that felt both comforting and devastatingly calculated. Her skin was cool, and for a moment the tension shifted back into that familiar, heady desire. She turned her head slightly, her lips grazing my jawline in a ghost of a kiss. "Go to sleep," she breathed, her voice thick with a feigned exhaustion that made my heart ache. She closed her eyes, and within minutes her breathing became deep and rhythmic. She was gone, drifted into a peaceful oblivion that I couldn't reach. I stayed awake, the something deeper we had felt earlier now curdling into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I watched the rise and fall of her shoulders, wondering if the woman I loved was still in there, or if I was holding to a beautiful, empty shell. The doubt wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a roar, and as I stared at the ceiling, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't the secrets she was keeping. It was the possibility that I didn't want to know the truth. The stillness of the room was a lie. While Elena's breath remained steady, my mind was a chaotic gallery of every moment she had looked away too quickly. The jealousy I had tried to suppress for months began to claw its way to the surface, sharp and jagged. It wasn't just the phone calls or the distant stares. It was the way she had looked at Julian at the gallery opening last week. There was a bold, unspoken language in that eye contact, a hunger that used to belong only to me. I sat up slowly, the cool air hitting my heated skin. The temptation to reach for her phone, sitting innocently on the nightstand, was a physical ache in my chest. It felt forbidden, a betrayal of the very foundation we had built. Yet the doubt was a poison that demanded an antidote. I looked at her. Her face was a mask of innocence in the moonlight, her lips slightly parted. She looked so soft, so reachable, and yet she felt miles away. My hand trembled as I finally reached out, not for her, but for the device. Just as my fingers grazed the cold glass, Elena stirred. She didn't wake, but she turned toward me, her hand sliding across the sheets to rest on my thigh. The touch was bold, possessive, and entirely subconscious. It was a cruel irony. Her body was claiming me as her secrets were pushing me away. The heat of her palm through my fabric sent a wave of longing through me so intense that it was almost painful. I wanted to wake her, to demand the truth, to lose myself in the fire we used to have before the shadows took over. The conflict was a physical weight. I was caught between a desperate desire to pull her into a fierce, demanding embrace and the cold realization that I might be holding on to a lie. I leaned down, my face inches from hers, breathing in the scent of her skin one last time before the world shattered. I could feel the magnetic pull, the something forbidden hovering in the air like a storm about to break. I reached for the phone again, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The screen lit up, illuminating the darkness, and the notification I saw changed everything. The light from the screen was a surgical strike against the darkness. It wasn't a text or a missed call. It was a notification for a shared location, an address in a secluded part of the city I didn't recognize, and a message that read, "The back door is unlocked. Don't keep me waiting this time." The air in the room turned to ice. I looked down at Elena. She looked like an angel, her golden hair spilled across the pillow, one hand still resting boldly on my leg as if to keep me anchored to her lies. The contrast between her peaceful face and the jagged betrayal in my hand was too much to bear. I slid out from under her touch, every movement slow and agonizing, and grabbed my jacket. I didn't plan it. I was simply propelled by a desperate, burning need to see the end of this. I drove through the rain-slicked streets, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The address led to a glass-fronted studio tucked away in an alleyway. Through the blurred windows, I saw a silhouette. My heart didn't just race, it thundered, a rhythmic roar of jealousy and longing. I stepped out of the car, the cold rain soaking through my shirt instantly. I pushed the door open. It gave way with a soft, haunting creak. The interior was swathed in heavy velvet curtains and the scent of expensive sandalwood. There, standing by a wall of flickering candles, was Elena. But it wasn't the Elena who had been sleeping in my bed minutes ago. She was draped in a silk wrap I had never seen, her eyes wide and glowing with an intensity that stopped me in my tracks. She didn't look shocked to see